So glad to see you all. We have a very special guest tonight. He is fresh from his worldwide tour, and I'm not exaggerating. This time last month, where were you, Glenn? Hawaii? You were in the Caribbean. Literally, he was in the Caribbean, scuba diving. We have a very special guest, Glenn Davis, senior pastor at Broken Arrow First Christian Church. And Glenn is no stranger to many of us here at First Christian Claremore because he was on our ministerial staff as associate pastor from 95, 96, and was primary portfolio responsibility was with the youth ministry of our church family. And so this is kind of a homecoming for Glenn, and we are delighted to have him. As Laurel mentioned earlier, Glenn was born and grew up in India with his parents Lou and Dorothy Davis, who were missionaries, and we are delighted to have him today. And Glenn, I will be quiet now so you can tell us as much as you care to. All right? Thank you. Glenn Davis.
It won't be as much as I care to because we do want to go home tonight. So I'll begin by saying that last October, my wife and I took a month and traveled to India. Up here is the route that we had taken. We started out in northern, way up at the top, even further north than what Mount Everest is if you go across Nepal, is where I went to school up in the foothill of the Himalaya Mountains. And I have to admit, my wife enjoyed that part the most because it was very beautiful and scenic. We did some hiking. But the rest of it was a true experience of India as we toured a lot of different places. So you're covering India on other nights, so we're going to primarily go into the area where my parents worked and the area of the hospital in Mangali. That's the lower letters that you see down there, the H-I-J-K, if you can make those letters out. The H is actually a place called Balangir, and that's one of the places my parents had worked and set up a lot of the mission work there. The I is a little place called Diptipur. It's a little village that was set up amongst some other villages, which was a long ways away from any other big place that had any kind of hospitals. And at that place, my parents helped set up a new hospital, and that just happened to be the hospital where I was born. And then going up to the J is where Mangali is. And so that's primarily the area we're going to touch on tonight. I do have one little detour, which we'll get to. But I'm going to be going through a variety of slides and talking relatively quickly. Raise your hand if you need me to slow down. I think on most of this, it'll come along pretty well. And then we'll get through it with enough time that afterwards we can have some discussion, ask questions, and you'll have enough that you should be able to ask me some questions. But we need to start by saying in India there are 16 official languages. So the language of government is called Hindi, but different states all have different languages, and then within each one of those languages there are thousands of dialects. So when you get out of the city in the rural areas, it can be where if you go just a couple villages away, they'll have trouble communicating with one another. And when you have lack of communications, you have a lack of a lot of things. So we're going to go from what you've already learned with the Namaste, which is the language of government, that is of Hindi, because we're going down to the state that used to be known as Orissa. They've recently changed their name to Odisha. A lot of places in India are going back to their old original names before colonization with the British there. And that's why, if you haven't caught on yet, what used to be Bombay is now Mumbai. So we're going to the state of Odisha, which used to be Orissa, and there they speak the language called Oriya, and the greeting there would be Namaskar. So everybody try that, Namaskar. Oh, very good, I feel it on. All right, so here we go, slide. Of course, we have to start out with the traditional. You go to India, okay, we backtracked, sorry. You go to India, next slide. It's not going any further. There we go. And, you know, we're on our way down to Orissa. You have to throw in. You get the Taj Mahal. We have to throw in this. Next slide. The other way. And, of course, whoop, one more back. Oh, there it is. Are they out of order somehow? Or is it slipping too fast, or is it out of order somehow? Okay, not a problem. And then you gotta, in India, experience the cobras. Most people just watch the cobras, but I had to get down close. And so to get us kind of into the feel of India, cobras give a little bit of that slimy, superstitious part, besides getting the Taj Mahal, which is beautiful and really awesome. You gotta get the feel of both, and then we go to the next. And in the town of Balangir, where the eye is, we're gonna see. Nope, can we go to the other, let's see. There we go, yes. This town of Balangir, it's a relatively small town, but what you find is even today, after all these years, when you get into the rural parts of India, towns are segregated and split up. And you get parts of the town that are of a certain type of people. You might have heard of the caste system. They'll have the caste system set up by different parts, which they'll call a different part of the village. And depending on what caste you're in, you might even have to live where the town isn't really connected to you. You have quite a bit of countryside between. So you might have an area that might have the bricklayers, or you might have people who do another type of thing that are the untouchables. And so as the town separates, you find that in the areas that have churches and Christians, you get Christian communities built up. And so in this relatively small town, a huge percentage of them are Christians. There's in this area that my parents helped set up, they helped build the first part of this church. It's the whole back part back there has expanded since we moved. But there are a little over 3,000 Christians in this area. This one church serves them all. And so on Easter and Christmas, the big ones, they have out in this open courtyard is where they'll have the worship. Next slide. And then inside, they have carpeting on the floor, so when you go in and sit down on the floor for worship. Stand up to sing, sit back down on the floor, no pews, no chairs. The women will sit on the right side, and the men will sit on the left side, and children will usually sit with the women. Sometimes some of the boys get to sit with the men if they've reached a certain age. That even happens with Christian life in India. Next slide. And so the church has expanded out some wings. Next slide. And just to get a feel for how they've done it, and they've set it up somewhat in the shape of a cross, which is traditional when you get into a lot of different places with churches, just so it becomes more identifiable as a church. The man in there was actually a friend of mine from childhood. His name's Bill Hahn, and he happens to work with the church and with the broader church right now, and his wife is also an ordained minister, which is really unusual in India at this time. Next slide. And then this is the outside of the church, and they put a light on the cross now, which of course wasn't there back then. We were happy to have any kind of electricity at all. So it's good to see that the church was still strong. One of the things that was a really great disappointment, and one of the things that Global Ministries asked me to address when I was out there, was that going back in history, when the missionaries were setting up things and setting up churches, it was a lot more than setting up churches. It was also setting up hospitals, setting up agricultural areas. And my father, as he was setting up churches and helping set up hospitals, was also in charge of helping set up the administrative aspect of the Church of North India. And the structure is still strong, however, because of the the population expansion in India has just gotten so big that there's so much more competition for everything that a lot more corruption exists now than what had. A lot of places gradually get away from culture as they become more modern. Get away from the corruption quite as much. India has backslid and actually has more, primarily because there is so much population and so much unemployment that they'll do anything to try and get ahead. Fortunately, within the church and the individual churches and the most of the lower echelons within the church, it has stayed really well. But our churches in India have a structure of hierarchy similar to what you might find in some other denominations, just because the Indian culture kind of demanded that. And so they also have bishops. And bishops might be a bishop over a district, a bishop over a state. And the bishops of the Church of North India, and even of the Church of South India, have fallen into the area of corruption. And actually, 3 of the bishops while we were there, were already in prison, and the bishop of this particular state, who lived at this particular compound in the house that I grew up in, is under investigation. So as far as I heard, he's not been arrested yet. But with the corruption going on a little bit, it has hurt the finances to the churches and to a lot of the missions. And so a lot of the places were more dilapidated and run down. And my biggest disappointment is we left Balangir, we went to Diptipur, the place that I was born. Next slide. Okay, that's my friend Bill Hahn again, and one of his organizations he runs. Next slide. And in Diptipur, this was one of the areas that really still shows has an awful lot of the mission work going on, that back in the early to mid 70s, when many of the missionaries pulled out, basically turned over the control of the churches and all the management back to Indian people who had grown up in the church and gone to school and got the education needed, which was one of our efforts in the first place. We didn't want to come in and run and control everything. We wanted to make churches and Christians and turn it over to the people. And the church was still strong. As small of a community as it was, they'll still have 600 people at church on Sunday morning. Next slide. But the hospital where I was born, the bishop had turned over to another organization so he could line his own pockets from what the organization had paid him, and that organization stripped a lot of the supplies and closed the hospital. And it caused a big fuss and a big roar. Next slide. And so we walked through the hospital, and Bill Hahn was with me. And as we went through the hospital, we talked about a number of different things. Next slide. And I just want to say that with Bill Hahn and his organization, outside of what the bishop had been working with him and talking with him some, he has gotten a doctor and medical staff in. He has control of the hospital, and they have that back open to a partial degree. Their first day opening, he said that they get support without it going through the bishops, and so we don't lose anything there. So that's one of the big things that's taking away their support right now is figuring out just how we're going to do that. Next slide. From there, we drove up to Mangabe. It is about the distances from here to Oklahoma City, and it took us about 7 hours to make that trip. Part of that was the roads and the conditions and such, but the other part was we were in the middle, well, actually right towards the end of a 9-day festival that is the one single festival that celebrates all the women goddesses of the Hindu religion at one time. All the male gods, they get their own days, but all the women get lumped into one festival. And so since this was the time, here we are, anytime we traveled through a village, all of a sudden they would have people all out decorated, and the elephants would be blocking the road, and we're stuck there. The elephant was out of focus because I snapped it real quick, because if they saw, actually, they came over and got our driver, and they pull people out and have them do silly things, and we didn't want to get noticed. That's why I pulled the camera in real quick. So while we're stuck here on the road, next slide, we're going to take a little aside, and this is just kind of, I know you're already talking about India, but one of our trips which we did while we were there was to the city of Varanasi, which used to be called Benares. It's one of the holiest cities in India. It's a place where Ganges River does some unique things. It reverses and goes the other direction in some places, and anyhow, it becomes one of the holiest cities. It's considered to be the home of one of their major gods, Vishnu, who is the god of destruction. And so, since the god of destruction lives here, this place will never destroy. So this is the place of life. It's the best place to be. And so this is the place you want to come and die. Try and make sense of that. Because of reincarnation, your best chance of being reincarnated into a better life, or maybe even reaching nirvana, would be to come and die in Varanasi, have your body cremated beside the river, and then your ashes put into the river. The river, the Ganges River, that may look like a beautiful water scene right there, but it is a river that if you see someone walking across it, you're not amazed. You're more amazed if they sink into the water. It is, we got into a boat on this river, next slide, and it's water that you just don't want to touch you anywhere. It is just really filthy. But of course, for the Hindus, one of the best things that you can do if you're not dying at the time is to come down early in the morning and do your cleansing washing in the river, because it is sacred, it is clean and beautiful. So we were told. I've known better. The only clean place is up near where I went to school, which was the headwaters. Next slide. Oh, and there'll be another one where you'll see a little bit of smoke, but the smoke that you see is from cremations that are taking place as well. Next slide. And here you can see people bathing in here and just feeling and knowing that they are cleansed because they are washing in this water. Next. And we learned from someone who went up and asked this woman, her mother was told that she would be dying at some point, and so they traveled over 1,000 miles basically and came here, and they're coming to the river every morning. And this is hospice for them. She's staying with her mother until her mother dies, so her mother can die by the Ganges River and be burned on one of the ghats here, one of the burning ghats, the steps. Next slide. This is our boatman, but this is Varanasi, the holy city, and this is just somewhat of a mindset of the people that within the Hindu religion, within the different faiths, that they don't see anything dirty, they don't see anything mystical, they don't see anything magical, that they just see it as holy as far as what takes care of them. Next slide. And these are some of the stack of wood which they use. Next. And the next. Jump on. Okay, so now the elephant's moving away, and we'll go to the next slide. Now we're in Mangali, and in Mangali. And in Mangali, it was wonderful to get there. We were there a couple of nights and a couple of days, and Anil Henry, his father and my father were good friends, and he and I and Mary, my wife, got along. He kept us beside him the whole time we were there, which was amazing. This guy hardly sleeps, and he's on the move all the time. His mind's always working. At 7 o'clock every morning, they have a devotional time, and the devotions are led by the nursing staff. They take their turns, and they sing, they read some scriptures. Next slide. And then they go over some of the day's duties. Next slide. And Anil Henry would address them and talk to them about some different things. This particular day was a very interesting day because right after the devotions, we happened to go outside for a very special thing they were all excited about. Next slide. And we had a dedication ceremony for 2 motorcycles that were donated. You have no idea how excited they were about that because they had very little in regards to transportation that wasn't the ambulance and a couple of important Jeeps which they had around. Next slide. Right after that, Anil grabbed us and said, come along. We said, where are we going? He goes, I'm going on rounds. You're coming with me. And we started doing rounds. This man, laying in the bed, had been here in this hospital for, he was coming up on 4 weeks. He'd been there 3.5 weeks. What he had wrong with him was that in his village, he was instructed to go for an inoculation. And the inoculation that he went for just happened to be at a little clinic that happened to be set up. They don't have to go through certain regulations other than to fill out the paperwork and get it authorized by the political medical person of the state. And so they went in there, and that's usually greasing a few palms, and they get that. So he had this inoculation, and it wasn't done right. It got infected. He went to the local medicine man, and as Anil calls him, the witch doctor, within the village, who sorry about this, guts from a chicken and rubbed it on it, and other things like that. It did get even more infected, and it got abscessed, and so eventually they finally brought him in here. And it's like he says, for some people it's like pulling teeth to get them to an actual hospital, especially a Christian hospital. And within this very Hindu community, you walk anywhere in there and say, I'm looking for the Christian hospital, everyone knows where that is within the town. And that's what they call it, not the Mungeli Hospital or anything like that. It's the Christian hospital, as opposed to any other one. It has a great reputation with the people, but the thing is, Anil won't grease palms. He goes in and tries to get things done the way they need to be done. So, next slide. There had been a birth early that morning that before devotions he'd been up and given, so he was checking on that baby. Next slide. And then we just kept going on, and it was just story after story that just tugged at your heart and almost made you nauseous as well with some of the different things going on. Next slide. Including this little boy, and this little boy had an injury that had also got infected, and they'd lived about 10 kilometers out of town, and the parents wouldn't bring him in because they didn't have any way to get there. And he said, we come out and get people, and he is constantly having to lecture people over and over again of the different services of the hospital. It's like he deals with the entire community as if they're his family, including the outer villages and such. Next slide. But what was so amazing is he has this hospital set up in ways, besides his own skills, which are remarkable, he has this hospital set up with just about everything that a hospital, that you could expect out of a hospital. And with the help of a few people, takes care of just about most of the different services. He has the equipment to do the scanning, and here he's done a brain scan. He has connections and arrangements with different specialists around the world. And so he had sent this scan to a neurologist, and the neurologist, next slide, had sent him back a report and told him what needed to be done and exactly how to follow through with the treatment. And so he's gets the specialist recommendations, and he follows the treatment. Next slide. And as you can see, next slide, the equipment that he has is, on the whole, really good stuff. Next slide. And at the time we were there, they're in the process of setting up one part of the hospital for an oncology wing. And he had a person who was finishing their residency who had agreed, I think this coming fall in September, is supposed to go out and be there on staff at the hospital, so they'll have a doctor to work in the cancer area. Next slide. We went up on top of the hospital and looked around. The compound that the hospital is on is a great big compound. And on this compound, next slide, there are several buildings. Some of them are run down and falling apart, but he's leaving them up primarily because anything that becomes open ground, people climb over the fence and try and squat on the land and quickly try and build a house. And if they build something, and this is one of the reasons he hates to be gone anytime, if they build something, the government of the town will say, oh no, that's a house, they have to stay there. And it just becomes a real nightmare and headache to do anything about. So, next slide. And as you can see, running all about, you have all the wildlife, monkeys and everything. Leaving it on this monkey for a little while. During most of this happening in one day, even though we were there a couple, during this same day, after we had done rounds and come up here and gone through a few more slides, which we're going to see in a minute, we got into a Jeep with Anil. He says, come with me, I have another thing to do. Would you come with me? And he's going to go speak to the political medical head of the district. And we said, sure. So we go along with him, and he was very clever because he introduced me as a visiting dignitary and just gave my name from America. And so the person was fidgeting and very uncomfortable and watching his words very carefully. But one of the things that I learned at that time, which I didn't realize, was this hospital, which probably for 500 miles in any direction, okay, maybe 400 miles, in any direction, is the most advanced hospital anywhere around, with probably one in injections for inoculations. Of course, he had given these people in the villages at the clinics the authority, who were coming in with very problem situations, but Anil's not putting out money into this person's hand, is really what it came down to. So he was using me, and I'd smile and I'd nod or give some kind of indication every now and then, and said, okay, so what is it we have to do? So if I do this, then this, and basically he boxed him into a corner and got him to say the right words, and so it's only been in the last little bit that he's finally gotten all the things through and gotten the approval, but for a long time they haven't been able to give injections as inoculations, so they can do anything else just about. That's why I left the monkey up there. It just seemed appropriate. Next slide. Again, leaving structure up. Next slide. So then we continue on with the rounds after we came down from the roof. We went into the women's ward and heard a lot more stories. And then, next slide. One of the things we found, and this looked like a really sad picture, but what they tend to have to do with a lot of their patients is, in place of giving an IV, because an IV is very expensive to run an IV into someone's arm out there, when really they get just as good, if not better, for the people of India there, nutrition and what they need from a mixture of egg and some saline solution and such, and really the only way that they can get people to take it, because they're vegetarians and they won't take egg. And some parents have let their children almost literally die before giving the approval, saying that they could give them this. But if they've been ill and haven't been able to take food or such, this has been the one way that they can sustain people, and that's to give them this solution and to put it through their nose and down their throat and just basically put it into their body. And so that's what was happening here, but that's one of the life-giving gifts which they can do, is as awful as it seems. Next slide. The hospital, unlike what you find in most of the rural hospitals, also has an area set up for family, because they know that families coming into a Christian hospital, it's an unfamiliar area. They want to make sure that they have a comfortable place to be. So they give them lockers, which they can come. They're in from the village. Next slide. And then there's places they can set up and cook and make their chapatis, the things that they would make in their homes at the villages. Next slide. And as they're cooking out there off to the left, there's even a little place where they can buy the groceries or other little things which they need, so they can be all self-sustaining right there and not have to leave their loved one there in the hospital. Next slide. And next slide. On the outside, they do have, this thing is 10 feet high by 12 feet wide, a big picture of Christ and healing people within the temple. And they leave that out there for everyone who comes in from the villages to see. A lot of them ask questions. So, next slide. Keep all the records, of course, next slide. But one of the things which, since most of these people can't pay, the only way they get some kind of payment, the government of India gives every person, and a lot of people in the rural areas lose these cards, but gives every person a card. And basically this card allows them X number of visits to a hospital or something per month, and anything more than that needs special permission. Next slide. On top of all of his medical stuff, there was a school on the compound, and it wasn't doing very good. It was run by the bishop, and most of the money got funneled out, and the place was getting run down. And so he went and talked to the bishop and said, hey, this isn't good. And he got the bishop to basically give it to him and say that he would keep his hands off. He started rebuilding, getting it going, and the school just started to flourish. And the bishop got together a council and said, hey, we're in charge of this. And he fortunately had the bishop sign some different things to say, hey, didn't you do all this? And in front of all the council, he had to finally admit to it. But he saw that it was making money again, and so that's why he wanted to get involved. Next slide. And so this is one of the parts that got torn down. Next slide. This is more of the school being built, new areas. Next slide. Next slide, more of the building. And it was just amazing that with all that he did in the hospital, that he could go ahead and take over and administer the school and make sure that all the things were falling together. Next slide. So while we were there, and this was after we'd gone and seen the political person, we'd come back, and being in India, Mary, I can't give blood because of the medication I'm on, but Mary likes to give blood, and being in India, we knew that we were going to come back. She couldn't give blood for another year after being in India. So she goes, I'm not going to be able to give blood. Can I give blood? Because you're in India, sure you can. And so she gave some blood. Next slide. And they were glad to take it and put it in reserve. Next slide. So while she was finishing up on that, Anil looked at me and says, I have some surgery to do. Come with me. And so I gowned up, and Mary came in a little bit later as well, and was in there for 2 different surgeries. Next slide. The first one was a cesarean. Next slide. We won't get into the... I kept most of the pictures out, so sorry about that if you really enjoy that kind of stuff. But the baby was born and was healthy. Next slide. And then the second one, he just went right from there while one of the people who was assisting went ahead and closed up and took care of that and went directly into the next surgery, which was an appendectomy. Next slide. And that's it right there. It's about the size of your pinky. That's your appendix. So that's being taken out. Next slide. I knew you'd want to see that. That was important stuff. An appendix always come towards the end, so here we are right about the end. I do want to say that after this, we did some more stuff. In this one particular day, I wanted to just stress on this one day because this was the full day we were there. And after this, we went through some more stuff, did some office stuff, one thing after another, and then about 11 o'clock at night, all the staff were out playing volleyball and badminton, so we went out and played badminton, and then finally had dinner about midnight, and got to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's when Anil went to bed too, and from what we can figure out, that's kind of his schedule, going to bed somewhere around 2 o'clock. And then Mary and I got up at 4 o'clock because we were catching a car to take us down to another place to catch a plane to leave. And there at 4:30, as we were pulling out, there was Anil up and dressed, seeing us off. And we had a good little conversation, then we left. We left and we had a lot to think about. And we were just so impressed, not only with him, but the facilities. We got back to Delhi and flew to London. And when we got to our hotel in London, I opened my email, and had this from Anil. He had written this up, and he sent it into Global Ministries, and it went to into one of the publications. It doesn't actually start right there, but go ahead and leave that slide up. He writes, visitors come to Mangeli all the time. We welcome them and take them around the hospital. They then land up in the lab and the blood bank, and it's amazing that we find cultures, the different things from cultures all over the world. Here in India, as in many developing countries and backwards places, people have a stigma of giving blood. They feel they are poor and hardworking laborers, and they will get weak if they give blood. Many would rather let their loved one die than give blood for them. Mary and Glenn were at the hospital a couple of days, and Glenn, who is the son of missionaries, and that just kind of goes down through that, mentions that part of it. So, and leave that up, and I'm going to read on after that. We had a lovely visit and had dinner, and they were off at 4:30 a.m. Just a little after they had gone, I was called to the hospital as a lady had delivered a baby girl in the village, and the placenta was still stuck inside. She was pouring blood. She was in shock, and her heart was racing 176 beats per minute, and her blood pressure was falling constantly. I immediately tried to stabilize her and sent her husband and brother-in-law to the blood bank, and was sorry to hear that the patient was O positive, and their relatives were both willing to give blood, but they were B positive. We were able to immediately use the plasma expanders and to get blood pressure up, and I was able to go in and remove the stuck placenta, and then we were able to get Mary's blood, which was type O, that she had just given. It was the only O that they had. They didn't have it in their shelf. They were able to get that and use it and stabilize the patient. All of her vitals stabilized, and she was transferred to the ICU unit and taken care of there. Next slide. While Mary and Glenn are ready to fly back to the States, 20-year-old lady Galaba from the village about 12 miles away from Mangeli sits in her bed smiling, not knowing a bit who this person is that gave her the gift of life just at the right time. Surely God works in mysterious ways. And we read that, and one of the things which I have always felt, and I have always heard comments, because I enjoy doing mission work, whether it's going and doing something as a study or going and doing work, whether it's in Haiti or the Dominican or any number of places, and people say, well, we have needs here too. And I have people who just love that we have mission, and I actually know a couple that don't like to go to church anywhere because churches like to give places that are outside their own community. If you have ever had any of these thoughts, and I remember with the youth here, we had some of these discussions too, and it was almost always split. So half the youth would say, I think we should do mission elsewhere, and people saying, I think there's needs right here. And I love that we have the diversity, that we think different on that. We need to embrace that. But the most important thing that I think in regards to doing some kind of mission work anywhere, or a mission study, or a trip that you experience different things, is that you don't leave those memories behind. You bring the experience back home, and that you let it help open your eyes to the needs that are within your own community. Work, and more caring work for the glory of God in our own home, when we're more aware of the needs of the world and God's people everywhere. Questions, discussion, thought? In a Christian hospital, you'll find a lot of signing in English. What I was interesting to find, even now driving around India, and always had a driver, and I've driven in Haiti and the Dominican and many other places, and I was smart enough not to drive in India. India is a large country, and the number of different states, besides the different languages, that you got to think of is just like here in the United States. You can think, oh, the diversity of states we have here. And if I were to say, okay, think of a state here in the United States which you would think of as the most poorest, backwards thinking state. Some of you may have had a state or two come to mind. Well, in India, if you say something like that, they would say, oh, automatically, Orissa or Odisha, this state. And it was really interesting. Most of the places that we traveled and drove around, whether we were in the train stations or somewhere, they would have signs in Hindi, in English, and in whatever language of that state. We drove into, not all of Orissa, parts of it didn't, but we drove into a certain part of Orissa, and we might think that, oh, that's the bayou or something. But all of a sudden, even Hindi disappeared. And we had a driver from another state who was driving us, and we drove in, and all of a sudden, he couldn't read the signs. And he was from India. So it was like, we don't want anyone in this district but our own people. It was almost a sign. But yes, as far as most places around India, you'll find signage in multiple languages, including English. And most schools will teach Hindi, besides their own state language, Hindi, English, and French.